Hey guys, tonight, we're stepping back in time, not to the battlefields of ancient Greece or the grand halls of Mount Olympus, but to the quieter, more intriguing corners where divine secrets were kept, or more accurately, where they were uncovered. You're probably nestled in your cozy bed right now, maybe with a weighted blanket pulling you into a comforting embrace, or perhaps just a soft pillow cradling your head. Close your eyes for a moment. Can you feel that gentle drift, that subtle pull towards relaxation? Good, because tonight we're going to explore a side of the gods you rarely hear about, a side so utterly mind-numbingly boring. It just might be the cure for your sleepless nights. We're going to delve into the fascinatingly dull world of Hera's celestial espionage network, and how her spies, the original work-from-home snoops, learned the incredibly tedious art of napping with one eye open. You might think this sounds exciting, but trust me, by the end of it you probably won't survive this without a deep, restorative sleep. It's less thrilling intrigue, more divine bureaucracy. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're all tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins, as many Greek myths do, with Hera, the queen of the gods, and her rather persistent problem, her husband Zeus. Now you might recall Zeus as the big, powerful thunder god, the king of Olympus. But what the history books often gloss over is his almost pathological inability to stay faithful. Think of him as the ancient world's most prolific philanderer, constantly shape-shifting into swan's bulls or even golden showers just to pursue his latest interest. And Hera, bless her perpetually aggrieved heart, was constantly playing cosmic detective. This wasn't about love. It was about pride, power, and maintaining some semblance of divine order. She wasn't just a goddess. She was the ultimate aggrieved spouse, and she had an empire to manage. So how did a goddess, even one as powerful as Hera, keep tabs on an omnipotent, shape-shifting husband who could literally disappear into a cloud? She couldn't be everywhere at once, right? Even with divine speed, Olympus is a big place, and the mortal world, well, that's just sprawling. She needed help, eyes and ears in places she couldn't be. This is where her initial network of surveillance truly began to take shape. It wasn't some grand centralized agency at first, more like a collection of trusted, incredibly loyal, and let's be honest, probably very bored minor deities and nymphs who had nothing better to do than report on Zeus's latest escapades. You might imagine a bustling war room with maps and pins, but in reality, it was probably a lot of whispered conversations behind marble columns and hushed reports delivered by startled woodland creatures. Historians still argue whether Hera's initial network was born out of genuine fear of rebellion or simply a desperate attempt to curb Zeus's rampant infidelity. The truth, like most things in mythology, is probably a blend of both. But one thing is clear: Hera was an early adopter of intelligence gathering. She understood that information was power, especially when your husband could turn into a talking badger to seduce a mortal princess. Okay, maybe not a badger, but you get the idea. Her methods were rudimentary by modern standards, relying on direct observation and word of mouth. There were no hidden cameras or miniature drones buzzing around Olympus. Instead, it was more about keen eyes, sharp ears, and an undeniable knack for connecting the dots of Zeus's increasingly outlandish disappearances. You could say she pioneered the concept of neighborhood watch, but on a cosmic scale. A quirky tidbit often overlooked is that some accounts suggest Hera would sometimes disguise herself as an old crone or a seemingly harmless bird to personally gather intelligence, which if true just adds another layer to her dedication. Imagine being Zeus mid-seduction, only to realize that the old woman knitting quietly in the corner is actually your vengeful wife. Talk about an awkward moment. This personal touch, however, was unsustainable. She needed a dedicated team, or rather a dedicated individual, who could manage the sheer volume of Zeus's extracurricular activities. And this need, this overwhelming desire for an all-seeing eye, would soon lead her to her most famous and ultimately most tragic asset. So Hera's initial forays into the world of divine surveillance, while earnest, were proving inefficient. She needed something more, someone with unparalleled observational skills, a living, breathing security camera, if you will. And that's when she turned to Argus Panoptes, the legendary giant whose name literally means all-seeing. You might picture him as a hulking brute, but Argus was more than just brawn. He was a marvel of ancient anatomy, a truly unique specimen among gods and mortals. His claim to fame, the very thing that made him the ideal candidate for Hera's ever-growing need for vigilance, was his extraordinary gift. He had 100 eyes. Yes, you heard that right. Not 2, not 4, but a full century of peepers dotted all over his body. Some accounts say on his head, others spread across his limbs, even hidden beneath his hair. Imagine trying to get a decent night's sleep with that many optical inputs. It sounds exhausting, frankly. This anatomical wonder meant that Argus was virtually impossible to surprise. When some eyes closed in slumber, others remained wide open, scanning his surroundings with an almost supernatural awareness. This wasn't just a party trick. It was a biological superpower that made him the perfect sleepless guardian. Historians still argue whether Argus was born with all these eyes, or if it was a divine blessing, she's curse from a forgotten deity. Some fringe theories even suggest he was an early prototype of a divine cyborg, but that's probably just the sleep deprivation talking. Think about it: in a world without CCTV, without motion sensors, Argus was the ultimate in passive security. He didn't need to patrol. He simply was. He could observe in every direction, simultaneously process multiple visual inputs, and presumably never miss a thing. This was a significant upgrade from Hera's previous network of gossiping nymphs. With Argus, she had a single point of failure. Yes, but that point was exceptionally well defended against distraction and deception. You couldn't sneak up on Argus. You couldn't whisper behind his back. Every twitch, every shadow, every errant leaf rustle was likely registered by at least a dozen of his vigilant eyes. It's almost like he was the original multitasker, constantly processing data from 100 different angles. It makes your brain hurt just thinking about it, doesn't it? The practical applications of Argus's unique physiology were boundless. He was often employed for incredibly tedious yet crucial tasks. Before his famous stint as Hera's personal bodyguard, he performed various thankless jobs for the gods. For instance, he once successfully captured a monstrous bull that was terrorizing Arcadia, a task that required not just strength, but constant, unwavering observation to track its movements and predict its charges. Another quirky tidbit: Argus was also credited with killing Echidna, a terrifying half-woman, half-snake monster who was the mother of many famous mythological beasts like Cerberus and the Hydra. This feat cemented his reputation as a formidable, albeit highly specialized guardian. He wasn't just a static observer, he was an active, capable force when needed. Hera, ever the pragmatist, saw in Argus the solution to her most pressing problem, Zeus. She needed someone utterly incorruptible, someone who could not be swayed by Zeus's charms or intimidated by his power. Argus, with his single-minded dedication and literally hundred-eyed focus, fit the bill perfectly. He wasn't susceptible to the usual divine politicking or flirtations. He was a pure, unadulterated instrument of observation. You can almost hear Hera sighing with relief when she finally secured his services. Finally, she thought a reliable pair, or rather 100 pairs of eyes on her philandering husband. Little did she know even 100 eyes could be eventually outsmarted. But that, my friends, is a story for when we're a little further into our sleepy journey. For now, just imagine the sheer sensory overload of living, as Argus never truly able to shut down completely. It makes your own tired eyelids feel like a luxurious gift, doesn't it? With Argus secured as Hera's chief sentinel, the stage was set for one of Zeus's more infamous romantic entanglements, an affair that truly tested the limits of divine patience and proved the necessity of Hera's surveillance network. This, of course, is the deeply unfortunate tale of Io. You see, Zeus, in his infinite wisdom and even more infinite desire, set his sights on Io, a beautiful priestess of Hera herself. Talk about awkward. This wasn't just any fling. It was a direct affront, a literal defilement of Hera's sacred space. It's like you're having a secret office romance, but it's with your boss's personal assistant, and also it's happening in the boss's office. The sheer audacity of it is almost impressive if it weren't so pathetically predictable for Zeus. Now, Zeus being Zeus wasn't exactly subtle, but he did try to conceal his escapades. His go-to move was usually to shroud the entire scene in a thick, dark cloud, a sort of celestial smokescreen, designed to hide his nefarious activities from Hera's all-seeing wrath. Imagine trying to explain that to your spouse. Oh, that massive, ominous, extremely localized storm cloud. Just a bit of atmospheric pressure, darling. Nothing to worry about. Definitely not me turning into a giant misty hand to caress a mortal. This cloud became Zeus's signature hiding technique, his equivalent of putting "Do Not Disturb" on his celestial door. But Hera, as you might recall, was no fool. She had a sixth sense for Zeus's philandering. Perhaps it was the sudden, unexplained meteorological phenomena, or maybe the way Zeus would suddenly get very busy with important kingly duties whenever a beautiful mortal caught his eye. Whatever it was, her spidey sense for infidelity was always tingling. She would observe these suspicious clouds from Mount Olympus, undoubtedly sipping on some divine ambrosia, and a familiar knot of suspicion would tighten in her stomach. It's a classic domestic scene, really just scaled up to cosmic proportions. You know when your partner suddenly becomes too quiet or too interested in a new hobby. Hera felt that. Big time. So one day, as Zeus was enjoying his clandestine rendezvous with Io hidden beneath his trusty blanket of fog, Hera decided enough was enough. She descended from Olympus, sweeping through the air with a determined glint in her eye. She was on a mission, and that mission was to catch her husband red-handed, or rather red-clouded. Zeus, sensing his wife's approach, because even a god can feel that chill in the air, when the missus is on her way, knew he had to act fast. He was caught in a moment of panic, a true oh crap situation for the king of the gods. What do you do when the queen of the gods is about to bust you? You improvise, of course. In a desperate spur-of-the-moment attempt to conceal Io and his transgression, Zeus did what he did best. He transformed her. With a flick of divine power, Io was no longer a beautiful priestess. She was instantly turned into a stunningly beautiful, snow-white heifer. A cow. Yes, a cow. Talk about a downgrade. This was his brilliant plan: turn the evidence into livestock. Historians still argue whether Zeus genuinely believed this would fool Hera, or if it was merely a knee-jerk reaction born of pure terror. Some fringe theories even suggest he had a secret cow fetish, but let's not dwell on that. It's safe to say, however, that turning your girlfriend into a cow is rarely a good long-term relationship strategy. You might think that transforming Io into an animal would be enough to throw Hera off the scent. After all, who would suspect a perfectly innocent-looking cow? But Hera was far too shrewd for such a transparent trick. She had been through this song and dance many times before. She knew Zeus's repertoire of deceptive transformations like the back of her divine hand. This sudden appearance of an exquisitely beautiful, pure white heifer, seemingly out of nowhere, was precisely the kind of anomaly that screamed Zeus's latest fling to her. The sheer perfection of the animal, its unusually docile nature, and its opportune appearance, right where that suspicious cloud had been hanging, it was all just a little too convenient, a little too... Zeus, smug in his bovine disguise, for Io probably thought he was home free. He had morphed his paramour into a beautiful heifer, a creature so seemingly innocuous, so perfectly innocent. Surely, he must have thought, Hera will never suspect this. Oh, the sweet naive optimism of a god caught in a lie. But you, my friend, know Hera better than that. She was no spring chicken when it came to Zeus's antics. Her celestial radar for infidelity was finely tuned, honed by millennia of dealing with his wandering eye and increasingly bizarre transformations. She didn't just suspect, she knew. Imagine Hera descending from the heavens, her divine presence radiating a chill that even the warm, fluffy clouds of Zeus's concealment couldn't dispel. She lands gently, perhaps near a quiet meadow where this suspiciously perfect white heifer is grazing. You can almost feel the tension in the air, can't you? Hera approaches the heifer, not with immediate rage, but with a calculated, almost surgical precision. She observes the animal's flawless coat, its gentle demeanor, perhaps the way it eyed Zeus with a longing that was distinctly uncow-like. This wasn't some ordinary farm animal. This was clearly a divine creation, and in Hera's mind that screamed Zeus's handiwork louder than any thunderclap. Her eyes, sharp and perceptive, would have noted every detail. The heifer's beauty was too pronounced, its posture too elegant for a simple beast of the field. It was the kind of perfection that only a god could conjure, and only a god attempting to hide something. This was Hera's vigilance at its peak. She wasn't just reacting, she was analyzing, deducing, putting together the pieces of Zeus's clumsy deception. She probably saw straight through the bovine facade. It's like when your kid tries to hide a cookie from you, and they leave crumbs all over their face. You know. So Hera confronts Zeus. Not with accusations of infidelity immediately that would come later, but with an almost unnervingly calm curiosity about this exquisite new addition to the celestial pasture. She feigned admiration, perhaps stroking the heifer's head. All the while her mind was racing, connecting the sudden appearance of the animal with Zeus's furtive behavior and that conveniently placed cloud. Zeus, ever the smooth talker, probably tried to spin a tale about how he just happened to create this magnificent creature as a gift for her, a gesture of his boundless love and devotion. You can almost hear the unconvincing sincerity in his voice, can't you? Just a little something I whipped up, darling, thought you'd enjoy a new pet. But Hera was having none of it. She probably smiled sweetly, a smile that promised retribution, and then delivered her cunning request. My dear Zeus, she might have purred, what a truly delightful creature, such beauty, such grace. I simply must have her. As a token of your affection, won't you gift this lovely heifer to me? Boom. Checkmate. Zeus was trapped. To refuse would be to admit his guilt, to confirm her suspicions. To agree would mean handing over his latest conquest to the one being on Olympus most likely to make her life a living misery. Historians still argue whether Hera's request was born of pure cunning or a genuine desire for a divinely created pet, only later realizing its potential as a tool of revenge. Some fringe theories even suggest Hera had a secret fascination with exotic livestock, but that feels a little too specific. Zeus, caught between a rock and a very hard place, or perhaps a goddess, and a very beautiful heifer, had no choice but to agree. He couldn't risk outright defiance. So with a forced smile and undoubtedly a mental groan, he formally presented Io in her cow form to Hera. You can almost feel Io's despair at this moment, trapped in an animal body passed between the two most powerful deities, her fate sealed by Zeus's poor judgment and Hera's unyielding suspicion. This wasn't just about the cow. It was about the principle. It was about Hera reasserting her authority, her understanding of Zeus's duplicity, and her unshakable determination to make him pay for his indiscretions. And pay he would, but not directly. The payment would be exacted through the suffering of poor, transformed Io. So there you have it, Io, the beautiful priestess. Now a pristine white heifer, gifted by Zeus to Hera. You might think, well, that's that. End of story, right? Oh, if only. Hera, ever the master strategist when it came to divine retribution, wasn't about to let Zeus off the hook that easily. Her acceptance of the bovine gift wasn't a gesture of forgiveness. It was the prelude to her most elaborate, most irritatingly persistent act of revenge. She wasn't interested in owning a prize-winning cow. She was interested in making sure Io, and by extension Zeus, suffered for their transgression. And for this, she needed the most vigilant, the most sleepless, the most utterly relentless guard she could find. Enter Argus Panoptes. Once more, his 100 eyes perhaps blinking in sequential surprise as he received his new, rather unusual assignment. His task was simple, yet incredibly arduous, guarding the transformed maiden Io with unwavering vigilance. This wasn't a casual babysitting gig. This was a high-stakes 24/7 surveillance operation. Hera commanded Argus to tie Io to an olive tree in her sacred grove, or some accounts say to a pillar. The exact location isn't as important as the ironclad reality of her imprisonment. Io was tethered immobile and utterly exposed to the elements and to the ceaseless gaze of her 100-eyed jailer. Imagine being Io trapped in the body of a cow, unable to speak, unable to explain her human mind still reeling within the confines of an animal's instincts. And then there's Argus, every single one of his 100 eyes fixed upon her, never closing all at once. When some eyes would doze, a dozen others would remain wide open, diligently scanning for any sign of escape, any approaching rescuer, or any faint whisper of Zeus's intervention. This wasn't just physical captivity, it was a psychological torment. You couldn't scratch an itch without being seen. You couldn't shift your weight without an eye tracking your movement. There was no privacy, no respite, no moment where you weren't under absolute scrutiny. It's like being perpetually under a spotlight, only the spotlight is made of eyes. Argus was the perfect guard for this particular task, because his unique physiology negated the fundamental need for rest that plagues lesser beings. We as humans need consolidated sleep. We need that glorious, uninterrupted stretch of unconsciousness to reset our brains and bodies. Argus, however, was a master of polyphasic vigilance. He could rest portions of his mind and body, while other parts remained fully alert. Historians still argue whether Argus truly slept in shifts, or if his 100 eyes allowed for a sort of distributed consciousness, where no single eye ever truly fell dormant at the same time as all the others. Some quirky tidbits, some ancient texts describe Argus as being full of eyes like a constellation, implying a celestial, almost otherworldly nature to his watchfulness rather than just a biological anomaly. This continuous observation was the very essence of Hera's cruelty. She wasn't just preventing Io's escape, she was ensuring her constant misery. Zeus couldn't simply sneak in, transform Io back, and whisk her away. He couldn't even approach without being instantly detected by Argus's myriad eyes. It was a perfectly designed system of cosmic deterrence, all centered around one sleepless giant. You can almost feel the profound boredom and despair that would settle over Io. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, each moment identical to the last, defined by the unblinking, relentless gaze of her guardian. She was a prisoner of sight, a captive of unending surveillance, and for Zeus it was a constant, irritating reminder of his misdeeds, knowing that his beloved Io was suffering, and he could do nothing about it simply because of Argus. With Io tethered, and Argus perpetually vigilant, Zeus found himself in quite the pickle. He was the mighty king of Olympus, capable of tossing thunderbolts and changing the very fabric of reality, yet he was utterly stymied by 100 unblinking eyes. It was a humiliating impasse, a testament to Hera's cunning and Argus's unwavering dedication. Zeus couldn't simply storm in and snatch Io. Argus was too watchful, too formidable. He needed a plan, a strategy that wasn't about brute force, but about cunning and deception. And for a task like that, there was only one god for the job: Hermes, the nimble-footed messenger of the gods, the god of trickery, thieves, and travelers. You might remember Hermes as the guy with the winged sandals, and the caduceus always zipping around Olympus delivering messages. But he was more than just a divine postman. He was incredibly clever, a master of persuasion and subtle manipulation. If anyone could outwit the 100-eyed Argus, it was Hermes. Zeus summoned him undoubtedly with a groan of frustration and laid out the problem. Argus, Zeus would have explained, probably pacing furiously, is too watchful. I need you to free Io, but without resorting to open conflict. Use your wits, Hermes. Subtlety is key here. This was right up Hermes's alley. He loved a good challenge, especially one that involved outsmarting someone. Hermes, ever the innovator, didn't approach Argus with a sword or a net. That would have been far too crude, far too noisy. Instead, he decided to use the most ancient and potent weapon known to humankind: boredom. His plan was elegant in its simplicity: to lull Argus into a complete and total slumber to achieve what no physical force could. This required patience, a knack for storytelling, and a deep understanding of monotonous sounds. You might think of it as the ultimate ASMR session, but with far higher stakes. So Hermes disguised himself. He couldn't just waltz up to Argus in his full divine glory. That would instantly raise suspicion among the 100 Eyes. Accounts vary on his disguise. Some say he appeared as a humble shepherd, others as a simple traveler. Whatever the specific guise, the aim was the same: to appear utterly harmless, utterly unthreatening, and utterly boring. He approached the field where Argus stood guard over Io, perhaps humming a tuneless ditty, looking as if he had all the time in the world and absolutely nothing important to do. This casual, unassuming approach was his first stroke of genius. He wasn't a threat. He was just there. He began to engage Argus in conversation, not about anything exciting or stimulating, but about mundane topics. He would talk about the weather, the best pastures for grazing, the price of sheep's wool in the nearest market. Imagine the excruciating dullness of that conversation. Argus, who likely hadn't had a proper engaging chat in ages, might have welcomed the distraction at first, keeping a few dozen eyes on Io, while others listened to Hermes drone on. This gradual, almost imperceptible infiltration of Argus's awareness was crucial. Hermes wasn't trying to alarm him. He was trying to bore him into submission. A quirky tidbit that often gets overlooked. Hermes was also the god of music, particularly the lyre and panpipes. It's highly probable that his early conversations with Argus were punctuated by the playing of incredibly monotonous, repetitive tunes on his pipes, or simple soporific melodies on his lyre. Historians still argue whether Hermes's music was magically enchanted to induce sleep, or if it was simply so incredibly dull and repetitive that it had a naturally hypnotic effect. Some fringe theories even suggest Hermes employed a primitive form of acoustic white noise to overwhelm Argus's senses, making it harder for him to focus on any single input. Whatever the method, the goal was clear: to bore Argus into submission, one eye at a time. This wily plan, based on the power of sheer tedium, was about to achieve what brute strength never could. Hermes, disguised as the world's most uninteresting shepherd, continued his relentless campaign of boredom against Argus. He wasn't rushing, wasn't pushing. He was simply there, a constant low-level hum of dullness in Argus's multi-sensory world. He would sit nearby, perhaps whittling a stick into an increasingly less interesting shape, or carefully counting imaginary sheep. The conversations droned on, focused on the most unremarkable aspects of pastoral life. "The grass is quite green today, isn't it?" he might say. "Almost too green, really. Makes the sheep think they're on vacation." Argus, in his perpetual state of semi-alertness, had probably never encountered such a master of mundane discourse. Then came the music. Hermes, as the god of music among other things, chose his instrument carefully. No soaring lyre melodies or rousing trumpet fanfares. Instead, he pulled out his panpipes, an instrument perfectly suited for repetitive, simplistic, and ultimately profoundly hypnotic tunes. He began to play not a symphony, but a series of soft, reedy notes, repeating the same gentle, monotonous phrases over and over. Think of it as the ancient Greek equivalent of listening to whale sounds or rain falling on a tin roof for hours on end, designed not to excite, but to soothe, to lull, to make the mind release its grip on vigilance. You can almost visualize the scene, the soft bleating of Io tethered to her tree, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the unending reedy drone of Hermes's pipes. Argus, with his 100 eyes, would have initially been hyper-aware of the new sound. But as the notes repeated, as the patterns remained unbroken, as the sheer lack of anything interesting persisted, his incredible vigilance began to waver. Each note was a tiny whisper of sleep, a soft suggestion to just let go. The genius of Hermes's plan was targeting Argus's polyphasic sleep pattern. While some of Argus's eyes would always be open, the sheer unrelenting monotony of Hermes's performance began to affect them. One by one, or perhaps in small, tired clusters, individual eyes would start to droop. You can imagine the effort Argus had to exert to keep them open, battling against the insidious advance of pure, unadulterated boredom. It's like when you're in a really dull meeting and you try to keep your eyes from glazing over, but they just insist on looking at the ceiling. Multiply that by 50. Hermes wasn't playing loud, jarring music. He was playing the musical equivalent of a soft, persistent hum, a background drone that slowly, inexorably began to blur the edges of Argus's perception. The shepherd's tales, the repetitive panpipe melodies, the sheer absence of any threat or stimulation. It was a sensory deprivation chamber designed to induce unconsciousness. This wasn't a quick knockout. It was a slow, deliberate erosion of consciousness, a gentle descent into the arms of Morpheus, assisted by the world's most boring playlist. Historians still argue whether Argus's unique physiology made him more susceptible to this kind of prolonged, monotonous stimulation, or if it simply prolonged the inevitable. Some quirky tidbits, some accounts, suggest Hermes told Argus a particularly long and convoluted story about the invention of the panpipes themselves, detailing every mundane step of their construction and the tedious process of finding the perfect reeds. Imagine trying to stay awake through that. This excruciatingly dull narration, coupled with the hypnotic music, was designed to exploit the very nature of Argus's vigilance. It couldn't perceive a threat where there was none, only an endless stream of soporific stimuli. And so with each repetitive note, with each droning word, one eye at a time, Argus began to drift, slipping closer to the very thing he was designed to resist: sleep. The air grew heavy, not with the oppressive heat of the day, but with the palpable weight of Argus's fading consciousness. Hermes continued his performance, a master of monotony, drawing out each note from his panpipes, stretching each syllable of his boring tales. He wasn't just playing music. He was weaving a sonic blanket, a comforting, inescapable shroud designed to smother vigilance. You can almost feel the pull of it, that gentle, insistent tug toward oblivion, the one you feel when you're utterly exhausted and the world around you becomes a dull, distant hum. Argus, in his valiant but ultimately futile struggle, must have felt the 100 eyes across his body succumbing to the relentless assault of tedium. One by one, or perhaps in small, tired groups, they would have blinked, fluttered, and finally irrevocably closed. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but a gradual surrender, like a lighthouse lamp, slowly dimming until darkness finally claims it. Hermes wouldn't have rushed. He would have observed patiently, waiting for the telltale signs of true deep slumber to settle over the mighty guardian. He probably kept playing just to be absolutely sure, adding a few extra hours of mind-numbing melodies just for good measure. Better safe than caught by a hundred-eyed god who just had a power nap. Finally, the moment arrived. All 100 eyes closed, the last flicker of vigilance extinguished. Argus Panoptes, the sleepless sentinel, the unblinking watchman, was completely, utterly, and profoundly asleep. It was a monumental achievement for Hermes, a triumph of psychological warfare over brute strength. You can imagine the silent sigh of relief that might have escaped Io, tied to her tree, as the oppressive gaze of her captor finally lifted, replaced by the deep, rhythmic breathing of a truly unconscious giant. For her, it was likely the first moment of genuine peace she had known since her transformation. This profound slumber wasn't just a nap. It was a testament to the power of overwhelming boredom and ceaseless gentle repetition. It highlights a peculiar aspect of mythological beings. Even those with divine powers could be susceptible to very human weaknesses. Argus's vulnerability wasn't physical, it was mental. He couldn't be broken by force, but he could be outmaneuvered by the subtle, insidious creeping of exhaustion. Historians still argue whether Hermes employed a specific divine charm to induce this deep sleep, or if his skill with music and narrative was simply so exceptional that it could achieve such a profound effect naturally. Some fringe theories even suggest that Argus's 100 brains, if he had them, simply overloaded from processing too much non-threatening, repetitive data. This event marks a crucial shift in the narrative. The very purpose of Argus's existence, unwavering vigilance, had been overcome. The seemingly impenetrable defense that Hera had so carefully constructed had been breached not by a thunderbolt or a sword, but by a lullaby and a few incredibly dull stories. It's a testament to the idea that sometimes the most mundane tools can be the most effective. No one expected the greatest watchman in the cosmos to be defeated by sheer boredom, yet here we are. It makes you wonder how many times in history major feats were achieved not through grand battles, but through patient, almost invisible acts of endurance or cunning. The silence that followed the cessation of Hermes' pipes must have been deafening, broken only by the gentle sounds of nature and the heavy breaths of the slumbering giant. This moment, when sleep's embrace finally claimed all 100 eyes, was the pivotal point. Io's rescue was within reach, and Zeus's cunning plan, or rather Hermes' execution of it, had finally paid off. But as we know from many of these tales, divine victories often come with unexpected and sometimes tragic consequences. With Argus completely insensible, every one of his 100 eyes sealed shut, in a deep, divinely induced slumber, the path was clear for Hermes to complete his mission. He didn't waste a moment. This wasn't a time for celebration or lingering. Hera's wrath was legendary, and Argus, though defeated by boredom, was still a powerful entity. Hermes, ever practical, knew that the best way to ensure Io's freedom and to prevent Argus from ever again serving as Hera's all-seeing monitor was to ensure he would never wake up. And so, with a swift, decisive stroke, Hermes brought about Argus's demise. Accounts vary on the exact method. Some say he used his sword, a sharp, gleaming blade, capable of severing the life force from even a giant. Others suggest he merely used a large stone, crushing the head of the sleeping sentinel. Regardless of the precise weapon, the outcome was the same. Argus, the hundred-eyed watchman, met his end, dispatched in his sleep. It was a rather ignominious departure for such a formidable guardian, taken down not in glorious battle, but by a cunning god and the profound power of a really boring story. You might think it's a bit harsh, killing someone who's just, doing their job. But in the cutthroat world of the Greek gods, loyalty to Zeus often superseded any sense of fair play or divine etiquette. Argus was a direct obstacle to Zeus's desires, and therefore he had to be removed. His death served as a grim reminder that even the most powerful safeguards could be circumvented, especially when a god with a penchant for mischief and a serious lack of impulse control was involved. This was a direct blow to Hera's authority, a clear message from Zeus that he would not be contained. This act, while brutal, was also incredibly efficient. Hermes not only freed Io, but also permanently dismantled Hera's most potent surveillance tool. Argus was unique. There was no one else like him with 100 eyes and a sleepless nature. His death created an irreplaceable void in Hera's intelligence network. Historians still argue whether Hermes felt any remorse for killing Argus, or if he viewed it purely as a necessary strategic move in the complex chess game of Olympian politics. Some quirky tidbits, some ancient sources portray Hermes as rather detached, often carrying out even violent tasks with a certain professional detachment, much like a divine agent following orders. He was, after all, the god of trickery, and sometimes the trick involved a permanent solution. Io, still in her heifer form, was now free from her literal chains and the unblinking gaze of Argus. But her ordeal wasn't over. Hermes, having fulfilled his immediate task, left her to wander. This abandonment, though not intended maliciously by Hermes, highlights the often fickle nature of divine assistance. Gods would intervene, achieve their objective, and then often leave the mortals they had helped to deal with the lingering consequences. For Io, the death of Argus was a liberation, but it also plunged her into an even more uncertain future, still trapped in a bovine body with Hera's vengeful eyes still very much open. The death of Argus also paved the way for the next phase of Hera's surveillance, one that would be more decentralized and perhaps even more insidious. She wouldn't rely on a single easily identifiable and therefore easily targeted giant again. Argus's demise was a lesson learned, a painful but effective demonstration of the vulnerabilities of centralizing too much power in one watchful pair of, 100 eyes. The news of Argus's death, delivered by some frantic nymph or perhaps a particularly agitated cloud formation, must have hit Hera like a bolt of Zeus's own lightning. Her ultimate guardian, the hundred-eyed sentinel she had painstakingly placed to ensure Io's suffering and her husband's continued humiliation, was gone. Not defeated in a grand battle, but subtly, cunningly, irrevocably put to sleep, and then dispatched by the nimble hands of Hermes. You can almost feel her rage radiating from Olympus, a divine heat wave of pure, unadulterated fury. It was a deep, personal insult, a direct challenge to her authority and her meticulous planning. But Hera, for all her fiery temper, was also a goddess of profound emotional depth, and in this instance her rage was tinged with something else, grief. Argus, though a mere instrument of her will, had been utterly loyal, tireless, and unique. There was no replacing him, no finding another hundred-eyed giant just around the corner. He had been her perfect, if somewhat dull, weapon in her endless marital war. His death was not just a strategic loss. It was the loss of a devoted servant, a silent witness to her pain and her determination. So, in a poignant and surprisingly beautiful act, Hera decided to preserve Argus's legacy. She wouldn't let his unique gift, his myriad eyes, simply vanish into the ether. She gathered his many eyes still gleaming even in death, and carefully meticulously placed them onto the tail feathers of her sacred bird, the peacock. Imagine the scene, a grieving goddess delicately embedding luminous eyes onto the shimmering emerald and sapphire plumes of a proud bird. It's a striking image, blending sorrow with a fierce determination to remember. And that, my friends, is the mythological origin of the peacock's dazzling eye-spotted tail. Every single eye on a peacock feather is, according to myth, one of Argus's original 100. Eternally gazing forever, watchful, a constant reminder of Hera's vengeance and the cost of Zeus's indiscretions. It's a beautiful, if somewhat morbid memorial, turning a symbol of defeat into a symbol of enduring vigilance. This act was more than just a tribute. It was a powerful statement. Hera essentially took the very essence of Argus's, being his eyes, and integrated them into her own personal iconography. The peacock, already sacred to her, became an even more potent emblem of her majesty, her watchfulness, and her unwavering power. Every time a peacock fanned its tail, it was a silent, dazzling declaration, "I see all." You can almost hear the whispered threats hidden within the rustle of those magnificent feathers. Historians still argue whether this myth originated as an explanation for the peacock's distinctive plumage, or if the bird was already sacred to Hera, and this story was later woven in to provide a deeper meaning. Some quirky tidbit: in some ancient cultures, the peacock was indeed seen as a symbol of immortality and protection, likely due to its elaborate tail and its association with Hera. Its vibrant display was thought to ward off evil. So Argus's eyes, even in death, continued their protective, watchful function, albeit in a more aesthetically pleasing form. And for Zeus, the peacocks strutting around Olympus, fanning their tails with those iridescent eyes, served as a constant, infuriating reminder of his successful deception, but also of Hera's enduring power and her refusal to let anything go. It was Hera's way of saying, "You think you won? I just upgraded my surveillance." It was a truly divine level of passive-aggressive monument building, ensuring that Argus's memory and the consequences of Zeus's actions would be on permanent, dazzling display. This marked the beginning of a new phase for Hera's intelligence operations, one that would be less reliant on a single vulnerable point and more about pervasive symbolic oversight. The integration of Argus's eyes into the peacock's plumage was more than just a beautiful, if slightly macabre, act of remembrance. For Hera, it was a profound strategic recalibration. Her chief, 100-eyed sentinel was gone, but his essence, his very capacity for vigilance, now adorned her sacred birds. The peacock's duty was, in a symbolic sense, to carry on Argus's legacy, acting as a living, breathing, and rather noisy emblem of her eternal watchfulness. You can imagine these magnificent birds strutting around the divine gardens of Olympus, their tails fanned wide, each eye a tiny glittering promise of Hera's unwavering gaze. This wasn't a direct replacement for Argus's active surveillance, of course. A peacock, no matter how majestic, isn't going to corner Zeus and demand answers about his whereabouts. But their presence served a crucial psychological function. Every time Zeus or any other god saw a peacock, they were reminded of Hera's power, her reach, and her absolute refusal to tolerate infidelity or defiance. It was a form of soft power, a constant visual suggestion of, "I see you." Think of it as the ultimate in ancient divine signage, broadcasting a clear message without uttering a single word. Hera is watching. The peacocks therefore became a new kind of watch, a widespread decentralized network of symbolic oversight. They weren't actively spying in the way Argus did, but their very existence, their ubiquitous presence around Hera's temples and the Olympian grounds, created an atmosphere of pervasive awareness. It was a brilliant, subtle move. Instead of relying on a single powerful point of failure, like Argus, Hera diversified her vigilance, embedding it into the very aesthetic of her divine household. It's like replacing one enormous, obvious security camera with 1,000 beautifully disguised miniature ones. This shift also highlights Hera's adaptability. She learned from her previous defeat. She understood that a single powerful guard could be outsmarted. But what if the very environment was imbued with watchfulness? What if the symbols of her power were also symbols of her surveillance? This led to a more dispersed, less direct, but arguably more insidious form of information gathering. Historians still argue whether the peacock became sacred to Hera before or after the Argus myth, or if the myth was simply a convenient way to explain an existing association. Some quirky tidbit. The peacock's loud, piercing call, often described as a scream, was also thought by some ancient observers to be a warning cry, further cementing its role as a vigilant guardian in the eyes of mortals and gods alike. So while the peacocks didn't actively report on Zeus's latest flings, they served as a constant shimmering reminder of the consequences of those flings. They were a living monument to Hera's enduring power and a subtle warning to anyone who dared to cross her. Their presence suggested an ever-present threat of discovery, a pervasive sense that even if you weren't actively being watched, you could be. It introduced an element of paranoia that was perhaps even more effective than direct surveillance. You never quite knew if those glittering eyes on the peacock's tail were just patterns, or if one of Argus's actual consciousnesses was peering out. This move from a centralized single-point guard to a decentralized symbolic presence paved the way for Hera's later more sophisticated methods of gathering information. It marked a transition from overt, brute force monitoring to a more subtle, pervasive network of influence and observation. The peacocks were the first step in this evolution, turning a tragic loss into a formidable and beautiful expression of divine authority and unrelenting vigilance. With the peacocks now majestically displaying Argus's legacy, Hera moved into the next phase of her divine intelligence operations. She realized that relying solely on powerful, identifiable guardians like Argus was inefficient and susceptible to direct attack. What she needed was a system that was less conspicuous, more pervasive, and infinitely harder to dismantle. This marked a significant evolution. Hera's spies became refined, shifting towards a model of decentralized surveillance. You see, Hera understood that while Zeus might be clever enough to outwit 100 eyes, he couldn't possibly outwit every pair of eyes on Olympus, or indeed, every whispering breeze, every rustling leaf. Her new network wasn't about a single powerful entity, but about a multitude of minor deities, nymphs, dryads, and even certain loyal mortals who for various reasons owed fealty to the Queen of the Gods. These agents weren't identifiable by glowing eyes or 100 limbs. They blended in. They were the innocuous-looking flower nymph tending to her garden, the seemingly idle minor god exchanging pleasantries at a feast, the quiet mortal priestess sweeping Hera's temple. This was a much more insidious form of surveillance. Imagine a vast invisible web of interconnected informants, each gathering small, seemingly insignificant pieces of information. One nymph might notice Zeus's sudden interest in a particular mortal village. Another dryad might report a peculiar cloud formation lingering over a secluded grove. A minor god might mention Zeus's uncharacteristic absence from a council meeting. Each piece on its own was harmless, but when pieced together by Hera's keen mind, they formed a comprehensive picture of Zeus's movements and intentions. This decentralized approach was far more robust. If one spy was discovered, it wouldn't collapse the entire network. There were always others. It was the ancient world's equivalent of distributed computing, where countless small nodes contribute to a larger complex picture. Hera wasn't just a queen. She was becoming the ultimate intelligence chief, transforming her court into a quiet, efficient data-gathering machine. Historians still argue about the precise extent of Hera's actual spy network versus the mythical portrayals, but the concept of a queen relying on a diverse array of informants is a mainstream historical fact seen in countless ancient kingdoms. A quirky tidbit often overlooked is that Hera's influence extended beyond just direct loyalists. She understood the power of social networks even in the divine realm. She likely encouraged gossip and whispers about Zeus's past misdeeds, creating an atmosphere where any new transgression would be met with immediate suspicion and scrutiny by her wider court. This informal grapevine served as an excellent, albeit indirect, source of intelligence, feeding into her more formal network. It's like having a dozen official reporters, but also 1,000 nosy neighbors who report everything they see. This refined approach allowed Hera to anticipate Zeus's actions more effectively, moving from a reactive stance, discovering an affair after it happened to a more proactive one, catching him in the act, or even preventing it. The system wasn't foolproof, of course, because Zeus was Zeus, but it certainly raised the difficulty level for his romantic escapades. The era of the easily spotted, hundred-eyed guardian was over. Now it was about the omnipresent, subtle, and incredibly frustrating whisper of everywhere eyes. With Hera's surveillance now a decentralized, whisper-thin web across Olympus, and beyond the methods of her operatives, became increasingly subtle. No longer were they relying on being unmissable multi-eyed behemoths. Instead, the focus shifted to the quiet art of observation, the nuanced reading of body language, and the almost imperceptible gathering of clues. This was the era of whispers and shadows, the art of information gathering at its most refined and arguably most tedious. Imagine a nymph seemingly absorbed in arranging petals in a sacred grove, but actually noting the precise timing of Zeus's frequent hunting trips to a particular mortal village. Or a minor god casually joining a conversation, subtly steering it towards recent divine appearances in the mortal realm, all the while feigning disinterest. These spies weren't about brute force. They were about gentle nudges, careful listening, and the meticulous piecing together of seemingly unrelated facts. It was like putting together a divine jigsaw puzzle, where each piece was a tiny snippet of gossip or a fleeting observation. Their training would have focused on blending in, on becoming utterly unremarkable. You wouldn't notice Hera's spies. They were the background noise, the silent observers. They learned to listen more than they spoke, to watch without seeming to stare, and to remember every detail. This required an immense amount of patience, a skill that, let's be honest, many of the more flamboyant gods severely lacked. It's like learning to become furniture, only extremely perceptive furniture. One of their key techniques was what we might call situational awareness. They weren't just looking for Zeus, they were looking for anything out of the ordinary. A new, oddly placed cloud formation, a sudden, unexplained abundance of a certain flower in an unusual location. Even a god suddenly taking an inexplicable interest in mortal pottery. Anything that deviated from the mundane routine of Olympus could be a clue. Historians still argue whether the Greek gods had a true intelligence service, or if Hera's network was more akin to a loose coalition of loyalists. However, the use of informants and strategic information gathering is a well-documented practice in numerous ancient human empires. A quirky tidbit is that some myths hint at Hera's spies even employing animals as unwitting informants. A loyal owl might report on strange nocturnal activities, or a flock of doves might carry messages through the skies. While not true spies, these creatures could act as extensions of the network, carrying information that a human or divine agent might miss or be unable to access. Think of it as ancient Greek drone technology, but with feathers and a penchant for grain. The essence of this refined intelligence gathering was that it was proactive, not reactive. Instead of waiting for Zeus to cause a commotion, Hera's agents were looking for the precursors to a commotion. They were trying to catch him before he even got a chance to transform into a swan or a shower of gold. This required not just observation, but also a degree of psychological understanding. They needed to anticipate Zeus's patterns, to predict his next move based on his past behavior. This elevated Hera's surveillance from mere vigilance to genuine strategic foresight. It's like being able to predict what your mischievous sibling is up to before they even finish tying their shoelaces. And for Zeus, it meant that the world, even the most secluded corners of it, felt increasingly populated by unseen eyes and unheard whispers. With the concept of decentralized, subtle information gathering firmly established, Hera faced a new, yet ancient problem for her agents' sleep. Even divine beings, or at least many of the lesser ones who comprised her expanding network, needed some form of rest. But how do you stay vigilant when your eyes are closed? How do you gather intel when you're lost in the land of dreams? This led to the development of a unique, almost peculiar discipline among Hera's dedicated spies: nocturnal naps, or the art of learning to nap with one eye open. This wasn't about proper restorative sleep, as you or I know it. This was about micro-naps, strategic periods of unconsciousness that allowed for minimal rest while maintaining a state of heightened awareness. Imagine learning to doze off, but keeping a portion of your mind, and crucially your senses, still engaged with your surroundings. It's like those long-haul truckers who briefly nod off for a few seconds at a time, except for divine intelligence gathering, and hopefully with fewer accidents. The training for this bizarre skill would have been rigorous and, frankly, incredibly boring. Hera's chosen agents, often nymphs or minor gods without much else to do, would practice for endless hours. They might start by meditating, focusing on external sounds while attempting to relax their minds. Then they'd progress to short, controlled periods of dozing with specific instructions to snap awake at the slightest unusual noise or shift in light. It was essentially a form of disciplined, high-level napping designed to prevent deep, incapacitating sleep. You can almost picture them propped up against a tree, one eye visibly drooping, while the other remained fixed on some distant horizon. This technique was crucial for tasks requiring long-term, unobtrusive observation, such as staking out a particular grove Zeus was known to frequent, or monitoring a remote mortal village where he might be entertaining. A spy couldn't afford to be fully asleep for hours on end. A quick nap, perhaps for a few minutes, was all they could manage before resuming full alertness. It allowed for continuous coverage, ensuring that Hera's vigilance never truly lapsed. Historians still argue whether this practice was a common informal skill among ancient divine beings, or if Hera specifically mandated and trained her agents in it as a strategic advantage. Some quirky tidbit: certain ancient texts hint at specific meditation practices by priests and oracles that allowed them to enter a trance-like state while remaining aware of their surroundings, suggesting a real-world parallel to this one-eye open sleep. Perhaps Hera merely formalized and weaponized an existing spiritual discipline. This peculiar form of rest also highlights the almost bureaucratic nature of Hera's later spy network. It wasn't about heroic feats. It was about persistent, often uncomfortable dedication to the tedious task of gathering information. Imagine the internal monologues. Must not fall into deep sleep, just a quick flicker of unconsciousness. Was that a rustle in the bushes, or just a squirrel? It sounds profoundly unfun, doesn't it? But for Hera, it was essential. She had learned the hard way that a fully sleeping guard was a defeated guard. Her new mandate was perpetual, if occasionally blurry awareness, ensuring that Zeus, wherever he was, would always feel the unsettling, almost subconscious presence of Hera's ever-watchful, partially napping eyes. Beyond the practical training in one-eye-open napping and subtle observation, Hera's decentralized spy network relied heavily on an unbreakable bond of loyalty. This wasn't merely about employment. It was about an unwavering, almost sacred commitment to the Queen of the Gods. Her agents, whether minor deities, nymphs, or even mortals, were bound by something far more potent than a mere contract: the onerous oath, loyalty to the Queen. You see, in the divine hierarchy of Olympus, oaths were serious business. Breaking one wasn't just a breach of trust. It was a cosmic transgression with potentially dire consequences, far worse than a bad performance review. Hera, a goddess deeply tied to vows and the sanctity of marriage, understood the immense power of a sworn promise. So for her most trusted agents, she likely required them to swear powerful binding oaths directly to her. This wasn't a casual handshake agreement. It was a solemn declaration before the very fabric of the cosmos, perhaps witnessed by Styx herself, the river of unbreakable vows. Imagine the ceremony. It would have been quiet, perhaps held in a secluded moonlit grove sacred to Hera. The chosen agent would stand before her, the air thick with divine power, and utter words of absolute fealty. "I swear by the immortal gods," they might have intoned, "by the sacred name of Hera, Queen of Olympus, that I shall serve her will in all things, keeping her secrets, reporting all that I see and hear, and never betraying her trust on pain of eternal torment. Okay, maybe not eternal torment, but definitely something really, really unpleasant, like being turned into a perpetually sneezing weasel, or being forced to listen to Zeus's boastful stories on repeat for all eternity. This oath meant that Hera's spies weren't simply employees, they were devotees. Their loyalty was absolute, unyielding, and enforced by divine law. It made them incredibly reliable, virtually incorruptible, at least by the standards of Olympian morality. Zeus couldn't bribe them, couldn't charm them, couldn't even really threaten them, because their bond to Hera was more powerful than any threat he could muster. This absolute loyalty was the bedrock of her entire decentralized system. Historians still argue about the precise wording of such divine oaths, or even if they were always formalized or sometimes understood telepathically. However, the concept of sacred binding oaths was a cornerstone of ancient Greek society, a mainstream historical fact that permeated every aspect of life, from treaties to personal promises. A quirky tidbit often overlooked is that Hera's meticulousness extended to vetting these potential agents. She wouldn't just pick anyone. They would have to demonstrate not only cunning and patience, but also an innate, almost unshakable disdain for Zeus's philandering ways. Perhaps they had been wronged by Zeus themselves, or perhaps they simply valued the sanctity of marriage above all else. This personal resonance with Hera's cause made their oath not just a binding magical promise, but a deeply felt commitment. This profound loyalty meant that information flowed consistently and accurately back to Hera. Her agents weren't just gathering data. They were serving a higher purpose, fulfilling a sacred promise. It was this unwavering dedication, born from the solemnity of their oaths, that ensured the continued effectiveness of Hera's omnipresent, if unexciting, intelligence network. And it was this unshakable loyalty that made Zeus's life increasingly difficult, knowing that somewhere, everywhere, a loyal servant of Hera, bound by an unbreakable vow, was always watching. With a network of loyal, one-eye-open nappers in place, Hera's surveillance system still sought new frontiers. How could information be gathered from places even a blending-in nymph couldn't reach? How could the deepest, most subconscious thoughts of Zeus's unsuspecting targets be accessed? This led Hera's more esoteric strategists to explore the realm of the unconscious, pioneering what you might call dream weavers, subconscious information transfer. You might scoff, but in the world of Greek mythology, dreams were far more than just random neural firings. They were often seen as messages from the gods, prophecies, or even windows into other realms. Hera, ever resourceful, saw potential in this ethereal space. The idea was to subtly influence the dreams of individuals, mortals, or minor deities who might have inadvertently witnessed something relevant to Zeus's latest escapades or who were potential targets themselves. It wasn't about planting false information, but about subtly nudging them to recall in vivid detail fragments of reality they might have overlooked while awake. Imagine a mortal shepherd who, while leading his flock through a remote valley, briefly glimpsed a magnificent bull with eyes like emeralds, only to dismiss it as a trick of the light. Hera's dreamweavers, perhaps minor deities of the night, or specialized nymphs with a knack for psychic suggestion, would then enter his dreams. Not overtly, not with booming voices, but with gentle, persistent imagery. They might replay the scene of the bull, lingering on its distinctive features, nudging the shepherd's subconscious to recognize its unusual nature. It's like watching a movie clip on repeat until you notice a detail you missed the first 10 times. This was less about direct spying and more about remote psychological probing. It allowed Hera to extract data that conscious observation might miss, or that individuals might not even realize they possessed. It was the ultimate passive intelligence-gathering technique, relying on the untapped reservoir of the human or demigod subconscious. This particular method also had the advantage of being almost impossible to detect. How do you guard against a dream? You can't put a hundred-eyed Argus on someone's slumber. Historians still argue about the true extent of divine intervention in dreams in ancient Greek beliefs, though dream interpretation was a mainstream practice. Some fringe theories suggest that certain cults dedicated to sleep deities had practices that mimicked this idea of directed dreaming, perhaps for prophetic purposes, which Hera's agents might have adapted for intelligence. It's a quirky tidbit to consider that your sleepy mind right now might be a potential information conduit for an ancient goddess. Just kidding. Mostly. The Dreamweavers would have needed incredible finesse. Too much interference, and the dream would shatter, or the mortal would wake up remembering nothing but a jumble of nonsensical images. Too little, and the desired information wouldn't surface. It required a delicate touch, an understanding of the fragile pathways of the sleeping mind. This method truly demonstrates Hera's commitment to leaving no stone unturned, no corner of reality unexamined in her relentless pursuit of Zeus's elusive wanderings. It also shows a surprising sophistication for a deity often portrayed simply as vengeful. She was also incredibly clever, constantly innovating her surveillance techniques, even venturing into the deepest recesses of the subconscious to gather her intelligence. For Zeus, this meant that even the unacknowledged glimpses of his indiscretions could eventually find their way back to his perpetually annoyed wife. Beyond the sophisticated tactics of dream weaving and the practicalities of one-eye-open napping, Hera also harnessed a far more pervasive and ancient force to bolster her intelligence network. Gossip's power social networks of Olympus. You see, even among the mighty gods, goddesses, and their various entourages, there was an incredibly active, vibrant, and often deliciously scandalous social scene. And where there are social scenes, there is gossip. Think of Olympus not just as a divine monarchy, but as the ultimate exclusive country club, brimming with interconnected families, rivalries, alliances, and crucially, an insatiable appetite for knowing everyone else's business. In this environment, whispers traveled faster than Hermes on a caffeine high. Hera, being a master manipulator of social dynamics, understood that this informal exchange of information could be a powerful tool. She didn't just tolerate gossip about Zeus's affairs. She subtly encouraged it, leveraging the natural human and divine inclination to share juicy tidbits. Her agents, the seemingly innocuous nymphs and minor deities, played a key role here. They weren't just observing, they were strategically participating in the social fabric of Olympus. They might drop a leading question, offer a sympathetic ear to a disgruntled deity, or simply listen intently at the edges of conversations during feasts or gatherings. Did you hear about that peculiar golden shower in Argos? One might innocently inquire, watching for reactions. Or, I simply can't imagine why Zeus has been spending so much time by that lonely river lately. Can you? This informal network of information flow was incredibly effective because it was self-sustaining. People gossiped because it was entertaining, because it made them feel important, and because it was simply part of the divine social landscape. Hera simply provided a subtle nudge, a welcoming ear, and an environment where such information once gathered could find its way back to her. It was the original social media, but with fewer emojis and more actual divine consequences. This leveraging of social dynamics is a mainstream historical fact observed in countless human courts and societies throughout history. Rulers and leaders often used informal channels and encouraged rumor mills to gather intelligence and gauge public, or in this case, divine sentiment. Historians still argue whether Hera actively seeded specific rumors to draw out information, or if she merely harvested the natural flow of Olympian chatter. Some fringe theories even suggest she had a specific nymph, perhaps named Whisper, whose entire role was to discreetly collect and collate all the juicy gossip. The power of gossip lay in its ability to reveal patterns, to expose connections, and to hint at secrets that no direct observation could uncover. A shared glance, a nervous laugh, a sudden change of subject. These were all data points for Hera's network. It meant that Zeus's clandestine activities, no matter how carefully planned, were always vulnerable to exposure through the very social fabric of his own realm. You can imagine the tension. Every friendly chat, every casual remark could potentially be an unwitting contribution to Hera's ever-growing dossier on his philandering. So while her formal agents were meticulously training for their boring one-eye naps and perfecting their subtle observational skills, the larger Olympian community, driven by the irresistible allure of gossip, was unwittingly contributing to Hera's comprehensive intelligence picture. For Zeus, this meant that even the most fleeting of glances, or the most innocent of comments, could, and often would, eventually find its way back to his perpetually vigilant wife. With her network humming along, utilizing everything from one-eye naps to the pervasive power of Olympian gossip, Hera's intelligence operations reached an impressive level of sophistication. But simply gathering information wasn't enough. Sometimes the goal wasn't just to know what Zeus was doing, but to prevent him from doing it, or at least to make it exceedingly difficult. This required a new skill set among her elite agents, the art of misdirection, or what we'll call divine distractions, the art of misdirection. You see, Hera understood that while Argus's 100 eyes could be circumvented by boredom, a clever distraction could throw even Zeus off his game, giving her agents time to confirm suspicions or even to disrupt an impending rendezvous. This wasn't about brute force. It was about subtle interference, a delicate dance of drawing attention away from the true point of interest. Imagine Zeus just about to transform into a particularly convincing golden shower over a mortal princess's tower. Suddenly, a minor goddess loyal to Hera might appear seemingly out of nowhere, complaining loudly about a lost pet, or perhaps staging a dramatic but ultimately harmless magical malfunction that requires Zeus's immediate kingly attention. Oh, mighty Zeus! My chariot suddenly lost its ability to fly. I seem to be stuck at this most inopportune moment, right here outside this particular tower. This tactic relied on a deep understanding of Zeus's personality, his vanity, his sense of importance, his short attention span. A well-placed compliment, a fabricated crisis requiring his specific divine intervention, or even a sudden inexplicable demand for his judgment on a trivial Olympian dispute could divert him just long enough for Hera's agents to gather crucial intel, or for the target of his affection to perhaps suddenly develop a headache and go indoors. It's like when you're trying to sneak a cookie and someone suddenly asks you a really complicated math question. Your focus shifts entirely. These distractions weren't meant to be obvious. They had to seem perfectly natural within the chaotic, dramatic landscape of Olympian life. A quarrel between two minor deities, a sudden, inexplicable outbreak of unusually vivid rainbows, or even a request for Zeus to arbitrate a seemingly mundane dispute among nymphs, all could be orchestrated by Hera's agents to create a momentary smokescreen. Historians still argue about the extent to which Hera's court was involved in active political intrigue beyond simply monitoring Zeus. However, the use of diversions and feigned crises is a common strategic element throughout military and political history, a mainstream historical fact. A quirky tidbit is that some of Hera's more mischievous nymphs were said to specialize in these diversions, using their natural charm and wit to playfully yet effectively derail Zeus's plans. They might engage him in a protracted philosophical debate about the nature of clouds or challenge him to an impromptu divine game of chess, knowing full well his competitive spirit would trap him for hours. These weren't just distractions. They were subtle, elegant acts of sabotage, delaying tactics that bought Hera precious time. For Zeus, this meant that his once easy conquests were becoming increasingly complicated. Every promising lead, every clandestine meeting seemed to be plagued by inexplicable delays, sudden interruptions, or frustrating detours. He wouldn't necessarily suspect Hera. He'd just think, "Why is everyone so needy today?" Meanwhile, Hera, perched on her throne, would be receiving detailed reports, a slight knowing smile playing on her lips as her agents continued to perfect their art of misdirection, keeping Zeus perpetually off balance and further ensuring his ever-so-boring yet completely observed life. Even as Hera's refined network of spies perfected their techniques of one-eye napping, subconscious probing, and divine misdirection, the shadow of the past loomed large. The tale of Argus, the hundred-eyed guardian, wasn't just a myth. It was a cautionary tale, an enduring whisper across Olympus. His story, his ultimate defeat by Hermes, and Hera's poignant transformation of his eyes into the peacock's plumage, served as echoes of Argus, the ever-present threat. You see, the story of Argus was more than just a historical anecdote for the Olympians. It was a living, breathing part of their collective consciousness. Every time a peacock proudly fanned its tail, those iridescent eyes served as a constant glittering reminder of Hera's unwavering power and the fate of those who dared to cross her, or more accurately, the fate of those tasked with preventing her husband's dalliances. For Hera's own spies, it was a profound lesson. Even the most vigilant, the most uniquely gifted guardian could fall. It underscored the need for their current, decentralized, subtle approach. They knew that overt, easily identified surveillance was ultimately vulnerable. For Zeus, the memory of Argus was undoubtedly a source of continuous low-level irritation. The peacocks were everywhere, their eyes watching him, a constant silent judgment from his wife. It was a brilliant passive-aggressive move on Hera's part, ensuring that he could never truly forget the consequences of his actions. Imagine trying to enjoy a divine picnic, only to be constantly reminded of your past mistakes by the very birds strutting around the grounds. It was psychological warfare at its finest. The legend of Argus also influenced the culture, of secrecy and suspicion that permeated Olympian society. If 100 eyes could be put to sleep, what hope did a mere 2 have? This realization fostered an environment where trust was scarce and discretion was paramount. Everyone was to some degree aware of Hera's watchfulness, even if they couldn't pinpoint her agents. This pervasive sense of being potentially observed was in itself a powerful deterrent. It's like living in a small town where everyone knows everyone's business. You tend to be a bit more careful about what you do in public. Historians still argue about the precise level of paranoia or vigilance that permeated the ancient Greek divine pantheon, with some texts suggesting deep mistrust between deities. A mainstream historical fact is that within royal courts, fear of spies and informers was widespread, leading to intricate networks of counter-surveillance. A quirky tidbit is that some versions of the myth suggest that the sound of the peacock's cry, loud and piercing, was also meant to mimic the last desperate cry of Argus as he fell, further solidifying its connection to his fate and acting as an auditory reminder of Hera's wrath. This dual sensory reminder, the visual eyes and the auditory cry, made it incredibly difficult to escape the psychological impact of Argus's story. For Hera's new generation of spies, Argus was not just a historical figure. He was a standard, a benchmark of ultimate vigilance. His tragic end served as a constant lesson. Their methods had to be different, more nuanced, more resilient. They couldn't be easily identified. They couldn't rely on brute force of observation. They had to be like the shadows and the whispers themselves, ever present but rarely seen. This perpetual echo of Argus, the silent threat, embodied by the peacocks, ensured that Hera's agents remained dedicated, their one-eye naps perfected, and their ears always attuned to the smallest whisper of infidelity. And for Zeus, it meant that even in his moments of fleeting joy, the watchful, silent memory of Argus was never truly far away. And so we arrive at the culmination of Hera's long, persistent, and frankly rather exhausting journey into the world of divine espionage. From her initial frustrated attempts to catch Zeus red-handed to the grand experiment of Argus, and ultimately to the sophisticated decentralized network of whispering shadows and one-eye nappers, Hera perfected the art of eternal vigilance, Hera's unwavering gaze. You see, for Hera, it was never truly about winning a single battle. It was about establishing a pervasive, inescapable atmosphere of accountability. Her goal wasn't to stop Zeus completely. She knew deep down that was a Herculean task, even for a queen of the gods. Rather, it was to make his philandering incredibly difficult, undeniably tedious, and always known to her. She transformed herself from a mere vengeful wife into the ultimate intelligence chief, operating a network that permeated every corner of Olympus and extended subtly into the mortal world. Her gaze, once limited by her own physical presence, now felt omnipresent. It was in the eyes of her sacred peacocks, forever displaying the borrowed vigilance of Argus. It was in the casual conversations overheard by her seemingly idle nymphs. It was in the fleeting memories subtly nudged forth in the dreams of unsuspecting mortals. It was in essence everywhere. Zeus could transform into a cloud, a swan, or a shower of gold, but he could never truly escape the feeling that Hera was watching. This constant low-level awareness was her ultimate victory, far more effective than any dramatic confrontation. This enduring legacy of Hera's surveillance system highlights a profound truth about power and control. It's not always about overt displays of force, but often about the subtle, persistent application of information. Hera didn't rule Olympus by fear alone. She also ruled by knowledge. She knew what was happening where, and often why. This made her an incredibly formidable force, able to anticipate challenges, respond to threats, and most importantly, hold her notoriously wayward husband accountable, even if only in the court of her own divine judgment. Historians still argue about the precise degree to which the Greek myths reflect actual social practices or ideals of the time. However, the concept of a powerful figure maintaining control through information gathering is a mainstream historical fact found in empires from ancient Rome to dynastic China. A quirky tidbit that often gets overlooked is that Hera's meticulousness in this endeavor perhaps stemmed from a deeper, unacknowledged sorrow. Her relentless pursuit of Zeus's paramours wasn't just about anger. It was about protecting the sanctity of marriage, a domain over which she reigned. In a world where the king of the gods himself constantly undermined this sacred institution, Hera's vigilance was in a way a divine act of preservation, a constant struggle to uphold a fundamental principle she held dear. So as we conclude our journey through the surprisingly boring yet utterly pervasive world of Hera's spies, remember that her unwavering gaze continues to ripple through mythology. Every time you see a peacock, every time you hear a whispered secret, you're catching a fleeting glimpse of her eternal vigilance. Zeus might have been the king, but Hera was the queen, who truly saw all, ensuring that even the most fleeting of divine misdeeds would eventually inevitably find their way back to her. It's a testament to patience, cunning, and the quiet, persistent power of knowing. As the last echoes of Hera's unwavering gaze fade, allow your own eyes to gently close, if they haven't already. The ancient world, with its grand gods and their surprisingly mundane struggles, begins to recede, leaving only a gentle quiet in its wake. Feel the soft weight of your blanket, the comforting cool of the air, the steady rhythm of your own breathing. The epic yet ultimately rather dull tales of divine surveillance have done their work. Let the intricate details of Argus's many eyes, the subtle whispers of nymphs, and the slow soporific tunes of Hermes's pipes blend into a seamless, peaceful hum in your mind. There's nothing left to watch, nothing left to worry about. Just quiet, just calm, just the deepening pull of rest. Allow yourself to drift effortlessly into the profound stillness of a truly undisturbed night.